evening and welcome to the celebration of the launch of our Poets Corner anthology from our desks. Welcome to all the contributing poets. There were 35 contributing poets and I think there are 25 of you here tonight. Welcome to our editors, Russ, Jude and Louise. And a special welcome to our guest speaker, Reverend Dr. Shawn Gilbert, who will launch our anthology. I'd like to tell you a bit about the history of Poets Corner, as I think there are very few here tonight who attended our early meetings. In 2002, Professor Mark Burrows from the United States was our first effective living centre artist in residence, and it was the inspiration from his exploration of poetry which led to the first meeting of Poets Corner under the leadership of Shawn Gilbert. It had humble beginnings, but has developed into a successful and highly valued program. David Ardez, one of our early guest poets and a member, called Poets Corner the best gig in town. After several years in the United States, David settled in Melbourne and set up a poetry group. We regard it as a great compliment when David asked our permission to name his group Poets Corner. Now, no doubt, the best gig in Melbourne. In 2010, we published our first anthology, Season of a New Heart. I wonder how many of you in the auditorium tonight were here at that launch. I can remember it well. The auditorium was packed. There was a palpable sense of anticipation and excitement. When looking through my Poets Corner file, I came across a poem I had written after that night. It may bring back some memories. I called it Postscript. On a night hot with emotion, the expectant crowd came to celebrate with us, the community of poets, Season of a New Heart. Philip, scholarly, eloquent, engaging, gently led us through the world of poetry, rich, life-giving. John, Russ, Jude, Lorraine thanked and honoured for fine editorship and design. 4 wonderful poems read to honour all the poets, to tantalise the taste, to whet the appetite. After the launch, long queue of eager buyers and humble poets surprised at seemingly celebrity status, admirers jostling for autographs. So Poets Corner offers this gift, Season of a New Heart, celebrating, yearning, connecting, searching. Poems to be cherished, to be read and reread. South Australia is particularly rich in fine local poets. Over the years we've had about 60 guest poets. They all tell us that they enjoy the experience, for although they have many opportunities to read their poetry, our meetings offer them the opportunity to talk about their poetry, life experiences, sources of inspiration and the creative process. As part of our meetings, which has become more important in recent times, is the opportunity for members to read their own poetry. This has provided encouragement and affirmation to new poets. Some members have read their poems for the first time, and some of the poems in this new anthology include their first published poems. Now, this is our new anthology from our desks, and the cover of this anthology was designed by Tori Tiller, who is the office coordinator here. We're all very impressed with this design. It's a simple design, but I think very attractive and eye-catching. Unfortunately, Tori's not here tonight, but I will certainly pass on our thanks to her. This anthology has been made possible by our wonderful editors, Jude Aquilina, Louise Nicholas and Russ Talbot. All distinguished poets and members of Poets' Corner who have given their time and editorial skills free of charge, and it has been a pleasure to work with them. I would ask them now to join me here, and later Louise will say a few words on behalf of the elders. I'll say a few words about each of them. Jude Aquilina is a fine poet and has been a guest poet on several occasions. She's also been an enthusiastic supporter of Poets' Corner. She was one of the editors of our first anthology and embraced the opportunity for a second edition. Louise has also published much excellent poetry, some in collaboration with Jude. She's a regular member of Poets' Corner, and when the idea of a new anthology was mooted, immediately offered her assistance. Russ Talbot has been a loyal and valued member of Poets' Corner for many years. We've always been impressed with his poetry and were delighted when finally an anthology of his work was published. Russ was also an editor of the first anthology, and when we planned a second anthology, it just seemed to be assumed that Russ would be involved again. Now, I have a little presentation here, and after which I'll just ask Louise to say more than a few words. So, Jude?
Thank you. More than a few words, dangerous words, very dangerous words. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to read this so I don't go on for too long. I tend to add little bits. Okay, so I'm speaking on behalf of Jude and Russ and myself, just about the selection process and our job as editors. First, I want to say what a pleasure it was, and a privilege too, because a poem is like a window into another person's soul, if you like, and it takes a particular kind of generosity to share your soul with others. So thank you to all those who submitted poems, over 100 in all, I think, wasn't it? Russ sent them to us as he received them, so it was a good day when another batch arrived in the email and we had to set aside our very busy and important lives to read poetry. I also need to say that, unlike editors for newspapers and publishing houses, all we had to do was choose the poems we thought best for inclusion in the anthology. We certainly weren't there to suggest or make any changes to the poems. A poem is the creative expression of its author, just as a painting is the creative expression of the artist. So we were no more going to change a poem than a gallery curator will alter a painting. Which is not to say that we didn't make some changes to some poems, but there were only small alterations of spelling, punctuation or grammar. And even then, we went by what the poet had done in the rest of the poem. So if a poet used standardised punctuation in all but one place in a poem, we figured it was a typo or oversight and corrected it. Aside from that, the poems in the chapbook are as the poets intended, or at least how they were submitted to us. Because I did have a poet once, when I was an editor of another anthology, say to me, with book in hand already printed, "Oh, is it too late to change it? I put in the wrong draft." So the answer to that, if you're wondering, is yes, it's too late. Our process in choosing the poems for the collection was a very simple one, in which we gave each poem a number from 1 to 4. The ones had a high chance of making the cut, the 4s not so much, and well, you get the picture. It was all very scientific. We did this individually on score sheets that Russ put together for us, and then we met at Russ's house and compared notes. Mostly we agreed, but there were some poems that we read and considered again before we made our final decision. Our ultimate goal as editors was for the book to be a true representation of Poets' Corner. Poets' Corner, as Mary said, is that rare and wonderful combination of a guest poet reading their work and talking about their work, alongside those who come to listen but also to read their own work from time to time in the open session after supper. So there are poems in here, this beautiful book, by poets who've spent years honing their craft, alongside those who write only when the mood strikes them, perhaps. And I defy any one of you to be able to say for certain which sort of poet wrote which poem in this anthology. And finally, to those who haven't read poetry since they read it and hated it at school, or those who think a poem's not worth reading if it doesn't rhyme, get over the fact that most of the poems in here don't rhyme. Milton's Paradise Lost didn't rhyme, doesn't rhyme, and read this little anthology. You might find something in here to make you think or laugh or cry. And better still, we're not going to ask you to write a 300-word essay on why it made you think or laugh or cry. Thanks for entrusting us with the editorship of From Our Desks, and congratulations to all the poets whose work appears within its covers. Thank you.
Well, now we've reached the point where our anthology is to be launched. And I'm going to ask Margaret Calder if she'll introduce our guest speaker, Shawn Gilbert.
Thank you, Mary. It is indeed a pleasure to be asked to introduce Reverend Dr. Shawn Gilbert. Though most of you will just remember him as Shawn, as he was our minister here at Christchurch for over 16 years, and he was one of the founders of the Effective Living Centre and, of course, of Poets' Corner, through his work in the task group Sacred and Creative. Shawn now holds a PhD. He's obviously not been very busy with his other work since he left here to have time, 4 years, to complete his PhD with a university medal. So we congratulate Shawn on that from all of us. His thesis was Spiritual Affections and the Pastoral Dispositions, so he is obviously very learned. He lectures students at the Theological College at Flinders. Before coming to Christchurch as a minister, Shawn had been in the USA completing his Master of Theology, which he also got with honours, and he was at Andover Newton in Massachusetts. There he was influenced by Reverend Mark Burrows, who Mary has already mentioned, and he invited Mark to Christchurch and to our Effective Living Centre at the ELC for a week in 2003. Mark's theme was the imaginative spirit. Indeed, Mark, we could really say, was the first of our guest poets by doing these workshops with us and introducing us to poets like Mary Oliver and William Stafford, US poets some of us had never read. And he influenced us, and he influenced Shawn, and he influenced many of you in this room. Indeed, The first collection of writings that the ELC published was Mark's work from that workshop, our first venture in publishing. The year after Mark's first visit to Poets' Corner, as Mary said, the ELC began our regular 2-monthly meeting, which you're all familiar with. Initially, we had all read other well-known poets and just shared our own writings, but Mary then had the very bright idea of inviting a poet that she had read about in the Messenger Press who lived locally. And so that started the way that we got all of you here at various times to read and discuss your writing of poetry and how the poetry has influenced you and how then again it has now influenced us. Because from those times we published our first anthology, Seasons of a New Heart, which Mary mentioned. Mark returned twice in 2005 and 2010, and so he was a guest at both of those at our Poets' Corner during both those times. Shawn too is very creative. He also writes poetry, songs, he plays the guitar, and he gives interesting sermons which challenge us and make us think. Indeed, he was back here a couple of weeks ago and so many more people in church that day came to hear Shawn. Indeed, he has been a great influence, I know, on people like Russ, on me, on Mary, and so people in this audience have been really must consider that Shawn has been a person in their lives that has affected their creativity and their way of thinking. It's been a difficult year with COVID-19, and it's been a delight that we have now come back to Poets' Corner. Gremlins got into my computer in May, maybe it was the COVID, and I recently found out that the poems that I thought I had sent to Russ are still wandering around the ether somewhere. They never arrived. So I will finish this introduction with one that I had sent. This poem is called A Sprig of Freesias. It's one that I was influenced in writing by the nature poets like Mary Oliver that Shawn introduced me to. I wrote it for my cousin, who was very sad as she had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. I'm sorry I don't have a sprig of freesias to hold up. You'll need to visualise it from the words. And I'm sure you know, a sprig of freesias grows many flowers on the one stem. A sprig of freesias. None are dead, though 2 are dying, slowly shrivelling. 2 are wide open in full bloom, sweetly perfumed, subtly coloured. They have a lot to give. And the new ones? The buds, life still to open to the sun and the warmth. How many of them? 5, 10, 15 years of happiness still to come. There is always a future. Spring always follows winter. So this spring, it's with a great joy that we welcome Shawn to launch our latest anthology.
Friends, it's a joyful honour to be here with you tonight to formally launch from our desks what I think is a truly wonderful collection of poems that, as I read them at least, arise from the everyday with the rare lyrical honesty. For me, they express the beauty and hope of common existence in an otherwise anxious, if not despondent time. Indeed, when recently reading Baruch Bachani's remarkable No Friend But the Mountains, I don't know how many folk here have read Bachani's work, I was struck by his retelling of leaving Tehran under the cloak of darkness with only the shirt on his back and a book of Kurdish poetry in his pocket. Do you remember that particular instance. And there you go. This attractive volume fits, and fits well also for uncharted journeys, though I pray not as desperate and perilous as was Bruce's. When I think of poetry, I'm mindful of the latent humanising power of its language. For as we know, it isn't just any kind of linguistic. In the careful analysis of Charles Taylor, a Canadian philosopher of great standing, poetics is both expressive and constitutive. Now, I reckon we all get the first expressive element, but the second might need some further unpacking. For by constitutive, he means that within the language of poetry exists many moving and interdependent parts making up a whole. A multi-layering, if you like, word, gesture, resonance, simile, metaphor, social context, culture, etc., etc. Not just words, but a whole multi-layering of experience, human experience. Wherein, and here I'm quoting T.S. Eliot, and I'm sure many of you will be familiar with this verse, wherein every word is at home, taking its place to support the others. The word neither diffident nor ostentatious, an easy commerce of the old and the new, the common word exact without vulgarity, the formal word precise but not pedantic. Do you know how that finishes? The complete consort dancing together. The complete consort dancing together. Thus, a conscious yet playful use of language, yet within a Western world that increasingly, at least in Taylor's mind, adopts what he calls the designative instrumentalist practice. That is, language that dutifully conveys heady ideas and concepts, thereby a mere utility or a tool in the hands of the influential and powerful, that is deliberately void of paradox or of ambiguity or of metaphor, and vacuous ultimately of empathy and feeling. Language in this day and age, particularly in the Western world, has become somewhat depersonalised, utilitarian, functional. It does a job, but that's all. So with this dehumanising reality in mind and in view, and even within my own religious profession that should know better not to exile the poets, yet it still does, the hope and the urgency of the poetic calling remains compellingly strong. It is needed to help right a linguistic and social imbalance. For Taylor relied upon the philosopher Martin Heidegger and the poet Friedrich Hölderlin. The pressing promise of poetics is its conversational character. Its conversational character. Its making and tone, that even as I speak now, I live in the hope of a meeting point between us. Even a communion born of a generosity arising from a shared experience. Not a competition of ideas per se, but a common humanity desirous of pooled meaning, pooled understanding, and peaceful purposes. Hölderlin says it far better than me, I think, and even with the translation out of German. He says, since a conversation we are. Since a conversation we are, and hear from one another. This standing in great contrast, obviously, to Descartes, who said, I think, therefore I am. Since a conversation we are. The hope of communion. Taylor then going on to say, the we here is we humans as essentially linguistic beings. Language comes to us through exchange. And this is the primary locus where it is maintained, altered and renewed. so that somehow in the conversation, in the dialogue, we all change, rather than power and the influential holding sway and enforcing ideas upon us. No, true conversation is a meeting point, and both the speaker and the listener are invited to a place of change. There's a making, a poesis in the conversation. So with all that in mind, and I know it sounds somewhat philosophical and maybe even heady in itself, with all that in mind, what first might appear to be a modest volume of poems, conceived in our so-called ordinariness and modestly expressed from our desk, is in fact a creative and timely pushback to informational banality, prosaic flatness, and a sterile rationality that would seek to banish humanities from our universities, that would decry the liberal arts as of no productive intent or of any economic value. God save us from this reckless and cynical posturing, not to mention ensuing legislation. This is the world we're living in. So I would encourage us all then, keep writing, or if need be, take up your pen and pencil and begin to write expressively, multi-layered. Play with language, experiment with its many given contours and nuances, and be amazed by what knocks on your inner doors, urging your own express uniqueness. And finally, resist designative prose whenever you can. And heavens, I'm sounding a bit like Wendell Berry. I don't know if you've ever come across his poetry, but it's sort of this older person giving very concrete advice. Avoid screens, he says. So, I said to Mary and Russ that my first impressions of the poems in this volume was how very real they are. They reflect and celebrate a present human goodness, even within their difference of form and subject matter. And this in itself draws us closer together and remains a miracle of poetic grace, worthy of repeating or rehearsing over and over and over again. So I am very privileged to launch Poets' Corner second anthology from our desks. And I would encourage you, friends, to enjoy these poems and converse richly around them and within them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shawn. I'm the person who likes to feel that everything is highly organised. At times I've been criticised as being a control freak, and so I thought we had everything organised tonight. But the person who is to give the vote of thanks to Shawn has not arrived. So Dot, if you would bring up... highly embarrassing. Jonathan Barker was to do it, and I talked to him this morning. Thank you. Well, I would say those of you who know Shawn, that was vintage Shawn. Eloquent, deep, thoughtful, encouraging, inspirational. What other adjectives can I use? So Shawn, thank you so much. Not just for tonight, but for the fact that without you, Poets' Corner would never have happened. It's that... Oh dear. Now it's time to hear poems written by 4 of our members. several years ago at a Christmas function, I met Cynthia Kennedy, and I don't know why, but we started to talk about poetry. And after that, Cynthia became a member here. Now, the title of her poem is From My Desk, 1954. And so it is from her poem that we got the idea of the title of our anthology. Cynthia writes of an early school experience, which she describes so well, and I think it will resonate with many people of a certain age. Thank you, Cynthia.
I don't know it off by heart. From my desk, 1954. Fire flickers in the grate. Bottles of milk warm up on the hearth. The monitors put out the tiny iodine tablets and see that the inkwells are full. The picture above my head catches my eye. I study the face of the laughing cavalier. Backs are bent, pens are poised, minds ponder figures on paper and blackboard. I finish the task and blot the page, find my reader from the shelf beneath, and all the while our teacher surveys us from the dais. A map rolls down and covers the board. It's the world flattened by Mercator. We learn the capitals, major rivers, and ranges of many countries in pink for the empire. The bell breaks the silence. For some, it brings relief. There's a shuffling of books and feet, eager to be homeward bound. Thank you.
Jonathan Barker, who is unfortunately not here tonight, but is a member of Poets' Corner, said to me, "Oh, my sister is a poet." "Oh," I said, "really?" And so after that, his sister, Jenny Drew, began coming to Poets' Corner. Now, Jenny has never read one of her poems at Poets' Corner, but when I read her poem, Alphabet Soup, in the anthology, I was very impressed, and I thought, she is a real poet. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Mary. This is a very short poem, and one that resonates with me because sometimes things don't always turn out like you think they're going to. Alphabet Soup. I dipped my spoon into a bowl filled with warm nourishment and found letters floating, waiting to be digested. I idly arranged them into a semblance of meaning for you to read in reply. But your bowl contained unresponsive, cold, clear broth. I turned away and ate my words.
Nimla Roy is a regular member of our group, and many poems which he has read to us have been very clever and humorous and have given us much amusement. By contrast, this beautiful poem, Lord of the Mysteries, is thoughtful and meditative, and I think many of us may find a resonance in her words. Thank you, Nim.
Thank you, Mary. This poem is called Lord of the Mysteries. Lord of the deepest mysteries, we travel to the furthest boundaries of thought to glimpse the reality of your truth. But you elude us. We plunge into the depths of your word, reaching for certainty, but encounter only symbol. We strain to capture your substance and lay bare your attributes. Driven by a compulsion to label and classify, we are overwhelmed by a need to demystify mystery. Yet, when the feverish search engines are laid aside and the mind slumbers, at a time of your choosing, you steal in unnoticed. And we feel, in a knowing born of unknowing, undergirding us, the everlasting arms. In the stillness of such a moment, the assurance of your presence pulses through our veins. In a dimension beyond the furthest reaches of human understanding, we know the unknowable, touch the intangible, and enter into the heart of mystery. Thank you.
Elizabeth Pratt is a long-time member of Poets' Corner. She published a book of poetry many years ago and tells me that the muse no longer inspires. However, this poem, Agapanthus, which tells of something from everyday life which brings back poignant memories, is an experience to which many of us can relate. Thank you, Elizabeth.
I was inspired to write this when I walked down George Street many times over the years and see the beautiful Agapanthus in show. So I've called this Agapanthus. He called them eggs with pants on, my father. They're standing tall now in their thousands. The pointed buds are opening, revealing their posies of blue fluted bells, along curbs, along fence lines. Some fall prey to the bud nipper and stand decapitated amongst their fellows. He went off to war, my father. Air Force, Intelligence, New Guinea, Borneo. Heard the drumming of engines as our planes hurtled down the runway and into the sky. Waited, often in vain, for the return of comrades. Named them one by one in his daily diary. 21st of February 1944. Laurie D. and Ron T. lost this morning, Ron's 21st birthday. He came home to us, my father, to let the war go and to live again. No longer my dad through letters, but my, I can see you, Dad. My dad of the eggs with pants on, the one still close in memory as I walk down our streets and see the lines of blue Agapanthus.
Well, that brings us to the end of the formal part of our celebration. A couple of notices. Firstly, there are probably some people here who are not on our email list to receive information about Poets Corner meetings. And if you would like to receive the notices, please give your name to Dot Crowley, who will be sitting out there at a table. Just give her your name, and we have your email address on the booking sheet. Secondly, the next Poets Corner meeting is on Monday the 23rd of November, and the guest poet is Belinda Broughton. Now, what you've all been waiting for, buying your copy of the anthology. Unfortunately, we've only got one credit card machine, and so it may require quite a long wait and some patience. And I know, and Rob Crowley will be sitting at the doorway of the office just to the right of the foyer. I know social distancing may be very difficult, but do your best. Books are $8, and we have 90 copies, I think, available for sale, so we're very happy to sell as many as possible. So thank you all for coming to share in this celebration, and I hope you will enjoy reading from our desks. Thank you.